The Battle of the Golden Spurs, when Flemish foot soldiers defeated French knights. The fields outside Kortrijk ran red with blood. The summer of 1302 brought with it not just the heat of July, but a clash that would shock medieval Europe to its core. For the Flemish people, the Battle of the Golden Spurs is more than a historical event. It represents the moment when common craftsmen and weavers stood against the finest cavalry in Christendom and emerged victorious. The old Flemish saying, "The day the spurs jingled," still evokes pride in the face of overwhelming odds. But what exactly led to this confrontation? What unfolded on that bloody field? And what were the reasons for France's stunning defeat? Flanders under the French crown. Count Guy of Dampierre ruled the county of Flanders at the end of the 13th century, but his position was far from secure. Flanders occupied a precarious position between two great powers, the Kingdom of France to the south and the Kingdom of England to the north. This wealthy region, enriched by its textile industry and trade, found itself constantly pulled between competing interests and loyalties. The Flemish cities had grown prosperous through the production of woolen cloth. Bruges, Ghent, and Ypres became centers of commerce where merchants from across Europe gathered to trade. The wealth generated by this industry created a powerful urban class of guild members, craftsmen, and wealthy merchants who jealously guarded their privileges and freedoms. These cities had obtained charters granting them significant autonomy, the right to maintain militias and control over their own affairs. However, this prosperity made Flanders an attractive prize for ambitious monarchs. King Philip IV of France, known as Philip the Fair, sought to extend royal authority over the semi-independent county. Philip was a calculating ruler who believed in absolute royal power and had little tolerance for the independence displayed by Flemish cities. He viewed Flanders not as an ally, but as a territory to be brought under direct French control. Count Guy found himself trapped between his feudal obligations to the French king and the demands of his Flemish subjects. The cities, particularly Bruges and Ghent, maintained strong economic ties with England, which supplied the raw wool essential to their textile industry. When Philip demanded that Flanders sever these English connections and submit more completely to French authority, tensions escalated dramatically. The situation deteriorated further when Philip began appointing French officials to administer Flemish cities, bypassing local authorities and trampling on traditional rights. French tax collectors arrived to extract revenues that the proud Flemish burghers considered excessive and illegitimate. The imposition of French administrators, French laws, and French taxes created deep resentment among a population that prized its commercial freedoms and urban liberties. In 1297, Count Guy made a fateful decision. He allied himself with King Edward I of England against France, defying his feudal lord Philip IV. This act of rebellion gave Philip the justification he needed. French armies invaded Flanders, and by 1300, Philip had achieved a decisive military victory. Count Guy was taken prisoner and transported to France. Philip installed a French governor, Jacques de Châtillon, to rule Flanders as a conquered province. Occupation and oppression. The French occupation that followed proved harsh and humiliating for the Flemish population. Jacques de Châtillon governed with an iron fist, treating Flanders as conquered territory rather than as subjects deserving respect. French soldiers garrisoned the cities, and French nobles were awarded estates and positions of authority. The traditional privileges of the Flemish cities were systematically undermined or ignored entirely. The arrogance of the French occupiers became legendary. French nobles treated the Flemish burghers and craftsmen with open contempt, viewing them as social inferiors unworthy of consideration. Stories circulated of French knights riding through city streets without regard for pedestrians. of merchants being cheated by corrupt French officials, and of ordinary citizens being subjected to arbitrary justice. Taxation increased dramatically as Philip sought to extract maximum profit from his conquest. The prosperous cloth trade that had enriched Flanders for generations now served primarily to fill French coffers. Guilds found their autonomy restricted, and merchants discovered that the protection they once enjoyed from their count had evaporated under French rule. Yet beneath the surface of apparent French control, resistance simmered. The guilds, which had long served not only as trade organizations, but as the backbone of urban society, became centers of opposition. In secret meetings held in guild halls and private homes, Flemish leaders discussed how they might rid themselves of French domination. The memory of their former freedoms burned bright, and the presence of haughty French nobles in their cities served as a constant reminder of what they had lost. The situation was particularly acute in Bruges, the wealthiest and most important city in Flanders. The city had been forced to accept a French garrison and French administrators who interfered constantly in local affairs. The citizens of Bruges, from wealthy merchants to ordinary weavers, shared a common hatred for their occupiers. All they needed was a spark to ignite open rebellion. The Bruges Matins. That spark came in the early morning hours of May 18, 1302, in an event that would become known as the Bruges Matins. The exact circumstances that triggered the uprising remain somewhat unclear, but the fury that had been building for 2 years erupted with terrible violence. According to tradition, the rebellion was planned by Peter de Koninck, a weaver and guild leader, along with Jan Breidel, a butcher. These men represented the common folk of Bruges, not the nobility or even the wealthiest merchants, but the craftsmen and workers who formed the backbone of Flemish society. They organized the guilds and prepared for a coordinated strike against the French garrison. In the pre-dawn darkness, as church bells rang for Matins, the morning prayer service, armed groups of Flemish citizens moved through the streets of Bruges. Their targets were clearly identified: French soldiers, French officials, and Flemish collaborators who had profited from the occupation. The password that identified fellow conspirators from Frenchmen was supposedly "Shield and Vriend," shield and friend, a phrase difficult for French speakers to pronounce correctly. What followed was a massacre. French soldiers were dragged from their beds and killed in the streets. French nobles who had taken up residence in Bruges were hunted down and murdered along with their families. Anyone who could not properly pronounce the Flemish password was assumed to be French and killed on the spot. The violence was indiscriminate and brutal, driven by 2 years of accumulated rage and humiliation. Contemporary accounts suggest that several hundred French were killed during the Bruges Matins. The city's streets ran with blood as the rebels systematically eliminated the French presence. By the time the sun rose fully, Bruges had been purged of its occupiers. The rebels seized control of the city government, expelled remaining French sympathizers, and prepared for the inevitable French response. News of the Bruges uprising spread rapidly throughout Flanders. Other cities rose in rebellion, expelling French garrisons or killing French officials. Ghent, Ypres, and smaller towns joined the revolt. Within days, French control over Flanders had collapsed everywhere, except in a few strongly fortified positions. The rebellion had succeeded beyond the conspirators' wildest hopes. But the rebels understood that their victory could only be temporary. Philip IV would never accept such defiance. The full military might of France would descend upon Flanders to crush the rebellion and exact terrible vengeance. The question was not whether the French would come, but when, and whether the Flemish militias could possibly stand against the finest cavalry in Europe. Preparing for the storm, Philip IV's reaction to the Bruges Matins was predictably furious. The massacre of French soldiers and nobles could not be tolerated. Beyond the immediate need for vengeance, Philip recognized that failure to crush the Flemish rebellion would encourage resistance elsewhere in his kingdom. he summoned his nobles and began assembling an army that would overwhelm the rebels through sheer superiority of arms and training. The army that gathered under Philip's command represented the flower of French chivalry. Thousands of mounted knights, equipped with the finest armor and weapons, answered their king's summons. These were professional warriors trained from childhood in the arts of war, men who viewed combat as their birthright and purpose. Leading them was Robert II of Artois, a cousin of the king and an experienced commander who had fought in numerous campaigns. The French knights rode to war with absolute confidence. They would face mere commoners, craftsmen and weavers who had no business carrying weapons, let alone challenging noble warriors. The upcoming battle seemed less a military campaign than a punitive expedition to restore proper order. Many knights viewed it as an opportunity to win glory and plunder, while teaching the rebellious Flemish a lesson they would never forget. In Flanders, the situation appeared desperate. The rebels had momentum and popular support, but they lacked military experience and proper equipment. Most Flemish fighters were guild members, craftsmen who had some training with weapons through their urban militias, but had never faced professional cavalry in pitched battle. Their weapons were often simple: pikes, underdogs, a Flemish weapon combining a club and a spear, axes, and whatever else could be fashioned or seized. Leadership of the Flemish forces fell to several figures. William of Jülich, grandson of the imprisoned Count Guy, provided noble legitimacy to the rebellion. However, the real driving force came from urban leaders like Peter de Koninck and Jan Breidel, who commanded the respect and loyalty of the common fighters. These men understood that traditional military thinking would lead to certain defeat. If the Flemish were to have any chance, they would need to fight on their own terms. The Flemish chose their ground carefully. Near Kortrijk, outside the city walls, lay terrain that would prove crucial to their strategy. The area featured ditches, marshy ground, and small streams that would impede cavalry charges. The Flemish commanders recognized that their only hope lay in forcing the French knights to fight at a disadvantage, neutralizing the devastating impact of a mounted charge on open ground. Throughout June and into early July, the Flemish army assembled near Kortrijk. Militias from Bruges, Ghent, Ypres, and other towns marched to join the gathering host. Estimates suggest the Flemish fielded approximately 8,000 to 10,000 men, though exact numbers remain uncertain. What is clear is that they were outnumbered by the approaching French army, which may have numbered 10,000 or more, including perhaps 2,500 mounted knights and nobles. The Flemish fighters prepared themselves mentally for the battle ahead. They knew the odds against them. They understood that defeat would mean not just death, but the complete destruction of their cities and the extinction of their freedoms. Yet they also believed in their cause. They fought for their homes, their families, and their rights against foreign oppression. That motivation would prove crucial in the hours ahead.
The battle unfolds. July 11th, 1302, dawned clear and warm. The French army approached Kortrijk with confidence, banners flying and armor gleaming in the summer sun. Robert of Artois surveyed the Flemish position with contempt. The enemy had formed up on foot, arranged in dense formations with their backs to Kortrijk. To experienced French eyes, this looked like a rabble of peasants awaiting slaughter. The Flemish had positioned themselves on slightly elevated ground between the Groeninge stream and several drainage ditches. These water obstacles, while not immediately obvious, would channel any attacking force into narrow approaches. The Flemish formations bristled with pikes and underdogs, presenting a hedgehog of steel points to any attacker. They had no mounted knights, no cavalry to counter the French horsemen. Everything depended on maintaining their formations and using the terrain to their advantage. Robert of Artois made a decision that would prove fatal. Despite some of his advisors suggesting caution and reconnaissance, he ordered an immediate cavalry charge. The French knights were eager for battle, and Robert saw no reason to delay. These were commoners, after all, not worthy opponents. A single charge would break them, and the slaughter could begin. The French cavalry formed up and began their advance. The ground thundered with the hoofbeats of thousands of war horses. Knights lowered their lances and urged their mounts forward, building speed toward the Flemish lines. It must have been a terrifying sight for the Flemish infantry, watching that wall of steel and horseflesh bearing down upon them. But then, the nature of the ground revealed itself. As the French cavalry approached the Flemish positions, they encountered the streams and ditches. Horses stumbled and fell. The charge lost cohesion as riders were forced to navigate obstacles they had not properly scouted. Instead of a unified, devastating impact, the French knights arrived at the Flemish lines in scattered groups, their momentum broken. The Flemish held their ground. As French knights struggled through the marshy approaches, Flemish infantry struck with pikes and Goudendogs. Horses were brought down, throwing their riders. Knights in heavy armor found themselves on foot in the mud, vulnerable to massed attacks by infantry. The formations that had looked so vulnerable suddenly became killing zones as the French cavalry became entangled and trapped. Robert of Artois himself plunged into the melee, trying to rally his forces and break through the Flemish lines. But the terrain and the determination of the Flemish fighters created a nightmare scenario for the French. Knights who had spent their entire lives training for mounted combat found themselves fighting on foot in close quarters against disciplined infantry. The weapons that had seemed primitive, the Goudendogs and pikes, proved devastatingly effective against armored knights at close range. The battle raged for several hours, but the outcome gradually became clear. The French cavalry, expected to sweep the Flemish aside, instead became bogged down and destroyed piecemeal. Flemish formations held, or, when breached, were reinforced by reserves. The psychological impact was enormous. French knights accustomed to victory and supremacy on the battlefield found themselves being killed by mere commoners. As the afternoon wore on, the French army began to disintegrate. Knights who had entered the battle with confidence now sought to escape. But retreat proved as difficult as the attack. The narrow passages through the ditches and streams became choked with fleeing men. Flemish infantry pursued, cutting down the French as they fled. What had begun as an expected French victory turned into a complete rout.
The aftermath. The casualties tell the story of the French disaster. Contemporary estimates suggest that between 1,000 and 1,500 French knights and nobles died at Kortrijk, a staggering loss. Among the dead was Robert of Artois himself, the French commander, along with numerous counts, barons, and knights whose names filled the rolls of French nobility. The cream of French chivalry had been destroyed by Flemish craftsmen and weavers. The battle earned its name from the aftermath. The victorious Flemish collected hundreds of golden spurs from the bodies of fallen French knights. These spurs, symbols of knightly status and nobility, were displayed in the Church of Our Lady in Kortrijk as trophies of the incredible victory. For the Flemish, the golden spurs represented not just military triumph, but the validation of their cause and the humiliation of their oppressors. News of the Battle of the Golden Spurs sent shockwaves throughout Europe. The established military order held that mounted knights were invincible against infantry. Battles were decided by cavalry charges, and common foot soldiers existed merely to be ridden down or to mop up after the knights had won the day. Kortrijk shattered that assumption. For the first time in generations, infantry had defeated cavalry in open battle. The victory did not immediately end French pressure on Flanders. Philip IV, humiliated and enraged, raised new armies and continued the war. Fighting would drag on for years, with France eventually reclaiming some control over Flanders.
Yet France never fully conquered the county again. The Peace of Autun-sur-Orge in 1305 restored much of Flemish autonomy, and while Count Guy remained imprisoned until his death, his grandson eventually gained recognition as count. The Battle of the Golden Spurs proved significant far beyond Flanders itself. It demonstrated that infantry, properly positioned and motivated, could defeat cavalry. This lesson influenced military thinking throughout Europe. The English longbowmen at Crécy and Agincourt, the Swiss pike formations that dominated 15th century battlefields, all owed something to the example set at Kortrijk. The age of unchallengeable cavalry supremacy was ending, though it would take decades for the full implications to be realized. For Flanders, the battle became the defining moment of collective identity. July 11th is still celebrated in Flanders as a holiday, commemorating the victory. The Battle of the Golden Spurs represents resistance against oppression, the triumph of civic virtue over feudal arrogance, and the power of unity in the face of overwhelming odds. Peter de Koninck and Jan Breidel, the leaders of the Bruges Matins, became folk heroes whose statues stand in Bruges to this day. The battle also vindicated the urban militias and guild system that defined Flemish society. The men who fought at Kortrijk were not professional soldiers, but citizens defending their homes and freedoms. Their victory proved that military prowess was not the exclusive domain of the nobility, that craftsmen and merchants could defend themselves when their essential rights and liberties were threatened.
The Golden Spurs, July 11th, 1302, did indeed become a day that changed Flanders and influenced the course of medieval warfare. The confident French army that rode toward Kortrijk, expecting easy victory, instead found death in the Flemish ditches and streams. The commoners who stood with pikes and Goudendogs, dismissed as rabble by French nobles, proved that courage, determination, and tactical intelligence could overcome superior training and equipment. The Battle of the Golden Spurs demonstrated that military dominance could not rest solely on social hierarchy and aristocratic privilege. It showed that motivated infantry, fighting for a cause they believed in, defending homes and freedoms they valued, could stand against and defeat the finest cavalry in Christendom. The lesson was not lost on other European peoples who chafed under noble oppression. Yet the victory came at a cost that extended beyond the battlefield. Flanders would endure years of continued warfare before achieving a stable peace. The economic disruption caused by prolonged conflict damaged the textile trade that had made Flanders prosperous. The county would never again achieve the complete independence that some Flemish patriots dreamed of, remaining instead caught between the great powers that surrounded it. Still, something fundamental changed on that summer day outside Kortrijk. The French knights who rode so confidently to battle that morning represented an entire social and military order. Their deaths in the Flemish marshes symbolized the beginning of that order's decline. The common men who stood against them, armed with simple weapons and extraordinary courage, represented something new. The assertion that rights and freedoms mattered more than birth and titles. The golden spurs collected from fallen French knights and displayed in the church at Kortrijk were more than trophies. They were symbols of a transformed world where craftsmen and weavers could challenge kings and nobles, where urban militias could defeat professional armies, and where the common people could shape their own destiny. The Battle of the Golden Spurs remains a testament to the power of unity, determination, and the refusal to accept oppression, no matter how overwhelming the odds might appear.